Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we have going on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or BRATTERSTEIN, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the disappearance and subsequent murder of 15-year-old Becky Stowe. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. They are all BRATTERSTEIN, but no pressure. Now this video is another subscriber suggestion. This video, yes, very good. This video was suggested by a member of the Brat Pack named Ayla. Hi Ayla, thank you. Ayla, God, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. A-Y-L-A. Got you, I tried. Basically, this is another hometown suggestion. This happened in her hometown, and I've been finding, as I've said in previous hometown videos, that I find this to be a very productive use of my channel space, bringing attention to cases that I had never heard of before, therefore perhaps many of you have never heard of before, and it helps us, all of us, the masses of the members of the Brat Pack, be able to remember these victims. With that said, today I'm bringing you a case out of Niles, Michigan, and this is a sad case with a very ideal ending, which obviously all the cases we cover do have ideal endings unless we're talking about a survivor story, right? Like that's just the nature of the beast that is true crime. But with this one in particular, it's very frustrating, especially because of the resentencing of Becky's murderer, but we will get there. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all of the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, after you've heard all the information, I want you to answer the question of the day, and that is this. What do you believe was the motive for Becky's murder? Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the disappearance and subsequent murder of 15-year-old Becky Stowe. Now, I want to start this video off with a quote, and this is a quote from the prosecutor who later prosecuted Becky's case. And I found this particular quote to be chilling, relevant, and I think it's a good way to kind of get an idea of where this case is heading, okay? The prosecutor said in Becky's case, and I quote, "This kid is a sociopath. He has no conscience whatsoever. Therefore, if he felt he needed to kill, he'd do it again." With that said, we're now going to jump in our handy-dandy time machine and we're going to head to 1993 in Niles, Michigan, which is a small town just north of the Indiana border. And in 1993, this place was described as a Midwestern vanilla sort of town that nothing was going on in, but they were close to a lot of areas where things were happening. This is where 15-year-old Rebecca Lynn Stowe, who went by Becky Stowe, lived with her mother Diana and her mother Diana's boyfriend Steve. Now Diana worked in factories, so she was gone a lot of the time, which left Becky alone often, but she was like an independent type of teenager, so she didn't really mind this. Her mom was working as hard as she could, putting in all the hours that she could to make sure that she could support her family and keep a roof over their heads, so this just left Becky home alone a lot, or home alone with her boyfriend Steve a lot. Now, Steve and Becky's mom had been together a long time. I read that they were together when Becky was only 3 years old, though they had moved in together a little more recently, but either way. Steve had been in the picture a really long time, so he had become sort of a father figure to Becky. And from everything that I read, it seems like when they were younger, well, yeah, they were younger, but when Becky was younger, they got along better, right, than they did in her teenage years. From what I've gathered, Becky found Steve to be a rather strict person. I didn't find anything that said that he was actually stricter than the average bear, the average father bear. I did hear that, like, there was a lot of tension between the two of them, particularly as Becky became a teenager. I mean, she was 15 when the story took place, and that's totally normal for things to get pretty rocky between a teenager and her parents, or, what's the word? The adults controlling her life, right? Right. So as I said, Becky and Steve butted heads quite often. And on one of these occasions, one of these severe head-butting matches, Becky decided, you know what? This has been real. It hasn't been real good, but it's been real, you know what I mean? I've been here for a long time, not a good time, basically. And she's like, I'm going to go. I'm going to go and I'm going to spend the night at my friend's house, which was Jacqueline, who went by Jackie. And Becky did just that. She got all of her things and she headed over to Jackie's house. Now, this is a thing that, fight or no fight, she probably would have ended up doing on many evenings regardless, because though Jackie and Becky hadn't known each other a very long time, not like years and years or anything, were the type of friends that met and immediately became very close and were together constantly. Anyways, Becky is at Jackie's, she's spending the night, but Jackie actually ends up leaving and she goes to spend the night with her then boyfriend, now husband, love, Todd. So Jackie's with Todd. I guess Todd was going to be going away for a couple of days and Jackie was supposed to go with him but wasn't going to go with him, so they wanted to spend some time together. So she goes, she stays at Todd's. The next day, her and Todd head back to her home to meet up with Becky. I guess this was totally, I don't know if this would be normal for everybody, but I have had friends like this that would just be at my house hanging with my parents when I'm not there. Like when I moved from my hometown to LA, my best friend Ashley still went and visited and hung out with my mom all the time. So it was a totally normal thing to me reading, but in case it's not a normal thing for you, for me this is normal. So Jackie leaves, she's at Todd, blah, 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 comes back home the next day, expecting to find Becky at her house. They get there at about 1 p.m., a little after 1 p.m., and they find that Becky is gone. But she had clearly just been there because, like, the music was on, I think the TV was on, the laundry was going, the curling iron was still plugged in, and there was still steam on the bathroom window, but she was nowhere to be found. Now, this could be seen as a bit weird, right? Like, I would feel like I'd be a little bit weirded out why, like, my friend just seemed to have upped and vanished while leaving everything on. But then again, teenagers are kind of sometimes inconsiderate little shits. So anyway, she's walking through the home and she quickly gets an answer to her question of, like, where's Becky? And that's when she finds a note, and it appears to be written in Becky's handwriting, and it just says, went to see Rob. Now, Rob was Becky's then sort of boyfriend, and he lived a short ways from Jackie's house, so Becky was known to walk over there, so it wasn't a big deal to her. She's like, okay, cool, she'll be back shortly. Like, Rob has a busy schedule. They're not going to hang out all day. Everything is chillin', right? Everything's cool. But then she finds out that she is wrong and things are not very super duper cool when Rob calls Jackie's house asking for Becky. Naturally, Jackie's response is, what the fuck? Like, she's not with you. She's supposed to be with you. And Rob's like, no, like, I haven't seen her. She was supposed to come over, but she hasn't been here yet. So that is why I'm calling. So at this point, Jackie panics a little bit because Becky's gone. She's not at her house. She's not at Rob's house. And she didn't take any of her stuff. Her wallet, her money, and her cigarettes were left at Jackie's house. So Jackie's like, okay, I'm going to call Becky's mom. So she calls Becky's mom, Diana, and she's like, hey, have you seen her? She's missing. And they talk a little bit and they decide not to freak out, not to panic right away. They were going to get together and they were going to go look for her. So they do just that. Jackie and Diana get together. They drive around. They look for her. They call everyone they can think of. They go to every place they can think of. They call family. They call friends. They call everyone. Okay? And nobody has heard from her. So after 8 hours and nobody seeing her, she was reported missing. Because though Becky would leave, I mean, she did. She left her home to go stay at Jackie's. She would go away. She would always contact somebody, so this was out of character. The first arriving officer said that she generally dealt with a lot of runaways. So when she heard Becky's story and heard what happened, that's what she thought the situation was at first, like a first glance. But Becky's mom just was not having it, because if Becky was going to run away, and that was like a big if in her mind, she knew that Becky would go and stay with her older sister, because her older sister's house was like her safe haven, a place that she could go and know that everything would be safe. Safe haven. Thank you, Brittany. But Becky's older sister, Cindy, had not heard from her either. And that let them know that something was seriously wrong here. And they were right, because Becky would never come home again. She would never be seen alive again. She had gone missing on that day in July 13th, 1993, which was just 2 days before Becky's mother's birthday. Now, police realize they need to locate Becky. She's 15 years old. She's missing. Nobody's heard of her, heard from her. And, you know, the story doesn't end well, right? It doesn't sound like it's going to end well. But before they can answer the question of where is Becky, they need to first answer the question of who is Becky. Becky Stowe was a 15-year-old sophomore at Brandywine High School who was just very typical in a lot of ways. She was always smiling, joking, having fun. The seriousness of life hadn't weighed on her yet, you know, and she was just the type of girl who could make any horrible situation fun, even if that horrible situation was having a long trip to a concert and camping trip canceled on account of rain. She was the type of girl to just stand outside, smiling in the rain, making friends with others whose weekends were seemingly ruined. Described as bubbly, smart, funny, and outgoing, the life of the party, not quite a girl, but not yet a woman. She was always on the phone, always with friends. She made a lot of home movies with her friend Jackie, where they just hang out and have a lot of fun, you know. Her favorite color was green, and her dream was to get a green Jeep and drive along the beaches in California, which, even as a California native, I can understand that fantasy. I can picture it in my head, but unfortunately, none of this would happen for Becky because her life was cut short when she was just 15 years old. She never even got a driver's license. Becky's sister Cindy said of her, and I quote, "Becky was vibrant. She was a little bit on the wild side. I mean, she was very adventurous." Becky was really close with her family, her mother, Diana, and her sister Cindy, who was 11 years older than her. And her mom were described as having, her and her mom were described as having the type of relationship I think I had with my mom. Like, when I was reading about it, I was like, I feel that very much. Because Becky could tell Diana anything, right? They were open enough that they had a dialogue going back and forth. She probably got to the point where she told her mom stuff that she's like, you know what, I don't really need to know that. Because I remember being a teenager and telling my mom one particular thing that I had done. And my mom was like, okay, here's the thing. I love that you're sharing, but there are some things that I just don't need to know. And I feel like Becky and her mom had that kind of relationship too. But what often comes with those types of relationships, just very, very closeness, almost friends in addition to being like mother and child, is that they argued a lot. I mean, this could be said to about any relationship with any parent, but they argued a lot. They butted heads a lot, and sometimes it would get kind of intense, which again, I can totally relate to, because when I was a teenager, me and my mom had like raging fights. But despite that, they were all still very close. They would do a lot of things together. They would do a lot of things, particularly like on summer breaks together. They lived pretty close to Lake Michigan. I think it was only like a 30-minute drive. So during the summer, they would go there and spend like all day at the beach, which I think is just like the lake, but like you're in Michigan, so the beach. Unless like all lakes have beaches, which I don't know because I'm not from a lake side community. Anyway, she and her sister would just do a lot of outdoor activities, is basically what I'm saying. She was very extroverted. She was friendly to everyone and loved to have fun and to laugh. She was just like any teen girl. She had her boyfriends and she had her crushes, and she was considered, quote, rebellious. And Jackie kind of confirmed this, saying that she was a bit on the rebellious side, and that she and Jackie were doing things that she wouldn't want her own 15-year-old son to be doing. But at the same time, the things that Jackie was saying about them was that they were kind of like goth kids. There was like the preps and the jocks and the alternative kids, and they were kind of the alternative kids, but they were the type of kids that were friends with everyone, and that they would have parties from here and there from time to time, and that at these parties there was alcohol and cigarettes, and that Becky and she partook, which is like, okay, is it good for a 15-year-old to be smoking and drinking? No, but when I think about who I was as a kid versus who I turned into as an adult, and I think about the things that I did as a teenager, I'm like, it's not like that bad. I'm not saying if you're 15 to do it, because I'm not saying if you're 15, don't do it. I'm just saying like there are also worse things I could do, you know what I mean, than be with a boy or two. But maybe I'll feel differently when Charlie's older. But if you are 15, don't do those things, is basically what I'm saying. But this video is also marked as not suitable for kids, so there you go. Other friends that were close to Becky said that they wouldn't describe her as a troublemaker exactly. They just said that she was the type of girl who had to grow up faster than necessary, than would be ideal in some ways, but was still a kid in a lot of other ways. The summer before she turned 16 years old, Becky was said to have started to change a little bit. The former tomboy was starting to turn more into like a young lady. I guess when she was like 10 or 11, she was more rough around the edges, more into like traditionally boy things. Like she liked baseball and basketball and going to Lake Michigan and going camping and barbecuing, all of the outdoorsy type stuff. But now that she was getting a little bit older, she liked things that were more young lady like. She was a little more girly. She started painting her nails, doing her hair, doing her makeup. She even got herself a boyfriend named Robert. Becky's sister Cindy said that Becky was super excited to have a boyfriend and was very excited for it to be Rob in particular. I guess Rob was like the hottie. He was like the crush of the moment, and Becky had landed him. And it was said that she was also like a little bit starstruck by him just because of like the status difference in who they were at school. Like he was a very popular football playing jock and she was a little alt girl that didn't get looked at as much by the popular kids. So when this hot, I don't see it. Personally, not my type. When this hot jock started paying attention to her, she got very enamored very quickly, and I guess the relationship moved pretty fast. So things seemed to be going good for Becky, right? She had this new boyfriend, she had good friends, she had maybe like an ideal home life, but not more than like the average teenager, right? So where did she go? What happened to her? Now, during the investigation into the who was Becky, right? The important question that you need to answer in order to help you find her. Police did learn something about her that could, not necessarily does, but could have something to do with what happened to her. And that's that they found out that at 15 years old, Becky was pregnant. Okay, I guess what happened, well, obviously she got pregnant. She was suspecting that she was pregnant. So her and Jackie, they went together and they went to Kmart. They bought a pregnancy test, probably looked in the makeup section and saw the Maybelline Matte Mousse foundation because that's what everybody was using. Bought the pregnancy test, left, went to Burger King. Don't know why they didn't use the bathroom at Kmart. Maybe it was not available to anyone because I was going to say anyone who didn't buy something, but they did buy something. Anyway, went to Burger King, went into the stall, took the pregnancy test, and it was positive. And Jackie says that Becky was stoked. Like she was really excited to have a baby. I cannot imagine being excited to have a baby at 15. I was excited to have my son, but the idea prior to being pregnant, the idea of being pregnant prior to me getting pregnant, even at 33 was like, absolutely fucking not. That's terrifying. So being excited at 15, hey, go her. Maybe she was somebody who always wanted a kid. She said that Becky was just excited to have somebody new in her family to love, which was like, it got me right there. Now, Jackie did say that Becky was nervous to tell her mom because I've already explained how their relationship was. They were very close. So at one point, Diana had actually taken Becky to get birth control so that she could be safe with what she was doing. And in the process of going to get the birth control, like you're talking about stuff, right? You're not just going, like you're talking about why you're going, right? And Becky had asked her like, hey, Mom, what would you do if I got pregnant right now? Like, how would you feel? What would you want me to do? And her mom told her that at this point in her life, if she was to get pregnant, she would suggest Becky get an abortion. In learning this, police are like, oh, maybe that's why she's gone. Maybe she did leave on her own. Because remember, they're kind of operating under the assumption that she ran away. So they're like, oh, maybe that's why she left. Maybe she was afraid of how her mom would react if she was pregnant, so she didn't want her to know. Or maybe she's hiding out to kind of wait out the period till it's too late to get an abortion so she can just come back and be like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. I'm just going to have this baby. But her mom was still not really feeling that and was actually pretty upset. She was upset to learn that Becky wouldn't have told her or told her sister Cindy, which is sad because there's nothing that can be reconciled now. But she also said that it just made her sad because even though she had said that she would want her to get an abortion, and even though there had been tension between the two of them, she would have been supportive of whatever Becky wanted to do. Now, even though the police were kind of operating under the theory that she might have run away, that she might have been afraid, okay, of the repercussions of her pregnancy. Maybe she was afraid to tell the father, afraid of how her mom might react, just kind of waiting out, right? Her family was like, I don't really think that's the case, and let me tell you why. It sounds like bullshit for a couple of reasons. One, she didn't take anything. She didn't take her wallet. She didn't take her money. She had $60 in her wallet. These are things that, I don't know, she might need if she was going somewhere. And on top of that, should you be smoking when you're pregnant? Abso-fucking-lutely not. However, she's 15. 15-year-olds aren't making good decisions. And she didn't take her cigarettes. And she was described as a girl who smoked a pack a day. And she smoked a pack a day of fucking Newports. Okay, those are strong cigarettes. She wasn't going in. If you've been a smoker or you've known a smoker, somebody who smokes a pack a day, you're not going anywhere without your cigarettes, and definitely not going anywhere without money to buy more cigarettes. Investigators did start to kind of agree with her family that there was more to it when after 2 days Becky had still not shown up. So they started to take it a bit more seriously, but unfortunately they had lost those 2 days where that is the most important time to be looking. But this is common and unfortunate, but we hear about it all the time. So now that police are like, okay, we should probably get down to business, they decide that they want to talk to Rob. The first person they want to talk to is Rob for a couple of reasons. One, The letter literally said that she was going to talk to Rob, right? It said going to talk to Rob. So duh, that's a good place to start. And they had confirmed with another friend, I believe this friend's name was Portia, that in addition to writing the note to Jackie saying she was going to go talk to Rob, she had actually been talking to Portia on the phone and was like, you know what I'm going to be doing? I'm going to be going and talking to Rob. So that's the first reason. The second reason is that Becky was said to be pregnant and he was her boyfriend. So there's a good chance that he might be the father, right? Right. So the cops head over to Rob's house. When they get there, they knock on the door. He answers the door and he's like, oh, my mom's not here. Because, you know, they're like, is your mother home? Because we need her here to question you because you are a child. Because he was 16. And he was like, no, she's not here. But if you want, she's going to be home soon. I don't know why I'm doing the Morty voice, but I did. Anyway, he's like, she's going to be home soon. So if you want to come in and wait, like, that's chill. We can sit here and wait for her. And then when she gets here, you can question me. Like, I'm cool with that. And she's like, cool. The cop. I'm down with that sickness. So she comes in, the cop. And they sit and they talk, and she says Rob's super chill. They just sit and then they chat. He's totally calm, totally relaxed. His mom gets home. They question him. They do the whole interview. And during the interview, he tells the police that, yes, him and Becky had been intimate, but it had only been one time. They had used a condom, and they had been on birth control. So when they hear this, she hears this, she's like, huh, well, maybe Becky had been intimate with somebody else then, and maybe this wasn't Rob's kid, you know? And it turns out Becky had been intimate with, like, one other person. But by all accounts, everyone said that Becky thought the baby was Rob's. Like, they talked to her friends. Anybody who she had told about it, they all said, like, she 100% believed the baby was Rob's. And they even tracked down the other person she had been intimate with. And they questioned him. And he even thought the baby was Rob's. She had told him that she was pregnant and said that the baby was Rob's. And they actually looked into this guy and they checked him out. And he did have an alibi and he was cleared. On top of that, you know, everyone thinking it was Rob's, it turns out that Rob and Becky had more sex, had sex more times than he was saying, right? Like, he was definitely minimizing their relationship a little bit. You know, he could be scared because he's being interviewed by police, but it turns out that Becky had a journal where she kept, you know, her private thoughts and also details of her private life, and Jackie ended up giving this to police to help with the investigation. And inside there, she had like a log where she would put little stars next to the days where she had been banging, and based on this log, they were able to determine that they had sex a few times, not just one time, like Rob said. So they asked him at this point if he knew that she was pregnant, because they had just asked if they were, like, intimate. They didn't bring up the baby yet. So they're like, listen, did you know that she was pregnant? And did you know you were thought to be the dad? And he's like, you know what? Yeah, I did. I did know that. And I actually did try to get her to get an abortion, because I'm like, I'm just really not down with that baby sickness. It's not really my thing. And then he also admitted to the police that he was a lot more casual about the relationship than Becky was. This dynamic, where, you know, Becky was more serious than Rob was... What? Yeah, that's right. The dynamic of Becky being more serious about the relationship than Rob was also confirmed by her friend Jackie. She said that Becky was just really, really into Rob. He was considered her first puppy love, and she just took the relationship very seriously, and she took intimacy in general very seriously. She even said in a home video of intimacy, and I quote, "I hate it when guys sleep with a girl and then that's it. You see, they try for weeks to get it, and then after they get it, they're just like, pff, gone." But Jackie confirmed that Rob just wasn't like that with her. He didn't take her seriously. He didn't take her on dates, no dinners, no movies, no meeting the parents, nothing. Rob kind of implied that he was too good for Becky, that he had been sort of slumming it by dating her, slumming it by dating someone on the other side of the track, somebody that he considered to be beneath him, which is fucking rude, first off. And also, doesn't it remind you, or maybe this is just me, of Pretty in Pink and Blaine? Like, Blaine, what kind of name is that? What kind of a name is Blaine? That's the name of an appliance. It's not a name. You know what I mean? Like, that's the vibes I get, and it makes me annoyed because that's fucking rude. Rob. Blaine. Rob. Rob was described as the all-American boy. He was handsome, popular, played on the football team, and Rob and Becky actually did seem like an odd pairing because Rob was this picture-perfect high school jock, and Becky was a bit of a rebel. She didn't play by the rules. She liked to question authority, and, you know, she smoked her pack a day. Girl, I was the same way in high school. I feel it so hard. And this made him apparently think he was better than she was, which again, I just find to be very annoying. Anyways, I feel like I've been talking about him a lot, but like, he was an important part of the investigation, so I'm just going in on talking about him. So during the interview, interrogation, whatever you want to call it, I think it was just an interview, he tells them that, like, yes, he was supposed to see Becky. He was supposed to see her on his lunch break because he has 2 jobs, and that was the only time that he had free between his 2 jobs during the day. And then every other part of the day, he had been with somebody else, so he had like an alibi, and that he had no idea where Becky could be. They talked at length, him and police, about his alibi and about Becky, and he said that he did some work landscaping in the morning, then was with family in the afternoon, and then went to his second job in the evening where he worked as a busboy. When discussing his relationship with Becky, he said that she was just sort of his like flavor of the month because he had a girlfriend. He had a serious girlfriend who was away in New York. So he had his New York girl and his hometown girl. Just like Michael Scott with Jan and the real estate lady. His like main girlfriend was like a pretty popular cheerleader who was in the grade above Becky. And this was the girlfriend he took really seriously. She had been brought home to meet the parents and have dinner with the parents. You know, she was the one who had went to family reunions, went on family vacations. She was the one intertwined in his life. Like, this was his serious girlfriend. Serious, even though he is cheating with Becky. So during the whole interview, Rob was super calm, cool, and collected, seemingly not nervous at all. Not even when police decided to take him to the station, the police headquarters, and give him a polygraph test. Apparently the person administering the test was like super good at their job, and Rob passed the test. He was said to have no knowledge about Becky's disappearance and not be responsible for her death. So with a solid alibi and passing a polygraph test, police had no reason not to believe that he was telling the truth and move on. Because even though sometimes, you know, it's always the boyfriend, it's always the partner, but in some cases, the most obvious answer is not the correct answer. They believed that was the case here, and they moved on. So from there, police were like, okay, we need to look at some more suspects. We need to move on with our investigation. And they move on to one of the earlier people of interest. And this was actually Jackie's boyfriend, Todd. So Jackie and Todd were dating. Obviously, it was her boyfriend because they were dating. But they were like a new couple. They had started dating that summer, and Becky was sort of like a third wheel for them because Becky and Jackie were always together. So that meant Becky and Jackie and Todd were always together. I guess Jackie would sometimes like ditch Todd for Becky because that was like her girl. You know, that's how it goes sometimes. And I guess Jackie was even supposed to go with Todd on a trip to Myrtle Beach, like right around the time that Becky disappeared, but decided not to go, to stay with Becky. And that was actually happening like right after Becky disappeared. That's why Jackie was staying with Todd the night before Becky disappeared, because he was going to be going to Myrtle Beach without her. So they wanted to spend some time together before he went. And that's why Becky was alone and able to like leave and disappear, basically. Not like that's why she was able to disappear, but that's why Becky was alone, because Jackie was with Todd, blah, 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 blah. I guess police wanted to get a hold of him right after Becky disappeared, but they weren't able to because he had like upped and left to go party in Myrtle Beach, and police were like, that's fucking suspicious, even though it was like a planned trip. But still, they were like, we need to talk to this guy. So they actually ended up tracking him down and questioning him and like searching his car, and he didn't seem to have any sort of connection. But even his girlfriend then, who is now his wife, but at the time, I'm glad they were able to get past all this, but at the time, even she was suspicious, and she called him and she's like, listen, I just need you to tell me, like, if she's with you, just tell me. I just need to know that she's okay. Like, she was so worried about her friend that she was just kind of suspicious of everybody. She like called him like wanting answers, wanting the truth, and he was like she's not with me. I'm sorry. Like it sucks. I understand you're scared, but she's not here. And I guess this poor guy, like even Becky's mom Diana was like, I need to make sure it's not you. Like, I'm sorry, but I need to make sure it's not you. So she went to his house and she was like, I want to look in the trunk of your car. I want to look in your basement. And he was like, okay, that's fine. And he let her look wherever she wanted to. He let her go wherever she wanted to. And he said he did this because he understood. He understood how upset and stressed and scared he was about Becky's disappearance, because that was, you know, his friend. So he could only imagine how hard it was on her mother. So he just wanted to let her do whatever she felt like she needed to do. Now, Todd did end up being ruled out, like, because he wasn't involved. But I can't even imagine how scary that was for him at the time where he was suspected, because it just seems like it'd be a scary thing to be suspected of something he didn't do, for one. And I don't really understand why he was suspected. I feel like I missed something there. I know that the cops were saying that, like, it was possible that he had dropped Jackie off and, like, met Becky down the road and picked her up to go to Myrtle Beach, and that they were just hiding it. But still, I just felt it was kind of weird, and it was kind of a long shot, but he was suspected, and here we find ourselves, and he was ruled out. So that was that. So police were like, okay, we need to move on. It's not Rob. It's not Todd. So let's, widen our search a little bit, or rather, let's tighten it in a little bit and look in the family. They wanted to look at the dynamics in the household because they knew it had been tense. So they do that. They look in and they find out right away, like, that Diana's not involved at all. Like, she was working at a job at the factory. She was out of the house. She was completely ruled out right away. But her boyfriend, Steve, wasn't. Police find themselves very interested in Steve and very interested in the relationship between Becky and Steve that was described as tense and sometimes even hostile. They were like, that is sketchy. And on top of that, Steve actually didn't really have an alibi for when Becky disappeared. He normally worked, like this was a scheduled day for him to work, but he had took the day off sick. And apparently he had never taken a day off sick. And he had nobody to account for what he had been doing at home during that time. He said he was just home, alone, sick, as one is, and was just hanging out watching movies. He said he watched the Helter Skelter movie, and that was that, but nobody could confirm this. And on top of that, he was also not at work the following day, a time when he could have presumably gotten rid of Becky's body if he was involved. And police were like, you don't have an alibi for this day either? And he was like, no, I don't. And so police start thinking that it's possible Steve moved in with Diana and Becky when Becky was a teenager, and they thought it could be possible that Steve was trying to get close to Diana so he could get close to Becky, and that Steve might have been abusing Becky, and that the baby she was carrying wasn't Rob's, but Steve's. Now, Diana was convinced that Steve was not involved, at least at first. She would try to look for different theories, alternative theories. She would go out and search for her everywhere. She would go to like abandoned buildings and just look in windows. She did like everything she could to try to find her daughter. And apparently Steve was really big on these searches also. He would go with her to look in all these different places, and he was convinced that her friends knew something more. He would talk to Diana all the time about how they were lying and how they knew more and da-da-da-da. And that might even be why Todd ended up on Diana's radar so hard, because Steve was like really pushing this, and the police came to believe that he was pushing so hard on all this to kind of push everyone off his track, essentially. Police said Steve was really, really weird about Becky's disappearance. He would say weird things and come up with weird theories and just act very anxious about the entire thing. He would even go as far as like, he'd be driving around and he'd see what he thought was like a freshly dug grave, and he would go and like dig this grave up thinking it was possible that Becky could be there, and it would always turn out to be like an animal or nothing at all. But he would always bring all of this information to police over and over, and they again thought he was trying to push them in a direction other than himself. Detectives were suspicious of Steve, so they actually put him under surveillance and they watched him when Becky first disappeared, but he didn't do anything that like made their ears perk up. I guess it would be like their eyes perk up since they were watching him. He did nothing of note that led them into anywhere new, but they were still like, I don't know, man. I don't know about you, my guy. There's still something off here. So they asked Steve, they are like, hey, would you be willing to take a polygraph test? And how do you think that Steve responded? By saying, absolutely, yes, I would like to do anything that would help rule me out so that you could start looking in the right place to try to uncover my pseudo daughter, right? False. Instead, he said, no, I won't be doing that. He went home, he packed all of his shit, and he moved out of the home he shared with Diana without saying anything to police or to her. Police said there was not a single thing he could have done to make himself look more guilty in that moment. Instead of, not only did he refuse a polygraph test, which like you should, first off, like refuse a polygraph test, get a lawyer always, but he refused a polygraph test, and then moved out of his house. Him and Diana had been together 12 years. And he up and left without saying a word to her. This made everyone think that police were on the right track in suspecting Steve, right? Because this was already weird, and prior to that, all the shit he had done was just bizarre when it came to her case. I guess at one point, him and Diana had gotten like word that Becky might be down in Myrtle Beach, right? So they actually go down there to search for her. And when they're doing so, Diana's like, well, what if she's down there and she ran away and she's just down there partying and having fun? And then we get there and she sees us and she runs from us again. And Steve was like, oh, she'd never escape me. And it just was one of those things he said that really stuck out to Diana. And you know what? Just real quick, since I mentioned Myrtle Beach, I've got to tell you a little bit about this trip because, oh my God, it's heart-wrenching. So Diana and Steve made this drive. It was a 15-hour drive to Myrtle Beach. And when they got there, they searched everywhere for Becky. Diana really did the most to try to find her daughter. They posted her flyer everywhere. They showed her picture to everyone they came in contact with. They went and talked to local police. They went to local homeless shelters, but they found nothing. Diana said that her and Steve would go to the boardwalk and just sit there and watch and wait in case maybe she showed up and was just walking around and they would see her on the off chance, right? Like they'd on the off chance see her. You know what I'm saying? And she said that they would go and hide in the bushes outside of homeless shelters in case Becky was trying to hide from them and showed up there trying to get food. And what's like really heartbreaking to me is before her and Steve left Myrtle Beach, she left messages for Becky written in various places where she might show up, like in chalk. She would write these big messages that would just say like, Becky, please come home. Becky, please at least call. Love, Mom. And that just like got me. She was like, maybe she would just show up at these places and see this and then I'd just have some answers. So anyways, back to Steve. They're saying that he's acting super suspiciously, but he is also being blamed for her murder at this point. Like, police told him, like, we know you killed her, and we're gonna figure it out, and da-da-da-da, we know it was you, my guy. And at this point, he was like, oh, well, if that's the case, I don't want to thugs with you or help you anymore. So when he was asked to take a polygraph test, I guess at first he actually did say yes. He's like, sure. Then he went, got an attorney. The attorney called the police and was like, yeah, no, he's not gonna be doing that. And it was at this point that Diana started to suspect him as well. She was just confused. She was like, if you're innocent, like, why would you not take the test? This doesn't make sense to me. And he said that he had just heard about innocent people flunking it and, you know, it getting them into some trouble, which again, don't take a polygraph test because he's not wrong. That's the thing, is he is not wrong. Of course, it makes you look guilty. Anytime you hear it, you're like, But it is the thing that the right choice is what he did, but then the wrong choice is for him to then up and move to Ohio. He literally just moved to Ohio, and I guess at first police didn't know he was in Ohio, on Ohio, like on Maui. Anyways, police didn't know he was in Ohio initially, so they looked for him for months. When they finally found him, they put him under surveillance again. They even went as far as following him on the 1-year anniversary of Becky's disappearance, hoping that this anniversary might make him want to do something, go see something, go, you know what I mean? Like lead them to her. So they followed him that whole day, but he didn't do anything weird. He just went to work, went to a bar, and went home. So at this point, with him not doing anything and him being under surveillance and not leading anywhere, her case went cold. This was a year into the investigation. Now, in the meantime, the searches for Becky had continued with dozens of local searches conducted by her family, friends, and even her boyfriend Rob, and Becky's mother Diane. They had ground searches and helicopters going. Becky's family and friends even organized their own task force, and police recognized and allowed them to do that. They would like help follow up on leads and provide any resources that they could to help. Police talked to all of Becky's closest friends, hoping that they might have some information on like things that maybe had been bothering her, places that she might want to go, things that she mentioned, just anything that could lead them anywhere where she might be, but they came up with nothing. Her family and her friends posted missing person flyers everywhere, in store windows, up on like street poles, just everywhere you could. The flyers went as far as places like Alaska, California, and Mexico. Like they were really getting her face out there. But months went by, a year went by, still no sign of Becky. Becky was described on her missing persons flyer as being 15 years old, standing at 5'6", weighing 125 pounds, with hazel eyes and short, dark brown hair. A reward fund was established to help, bring in tips on Becky, and her family and friends helped raise money for this rewards fund by having a rummage sale where they made and sold these little green ribbons in Becky's honor because green was her favorite color. And they were also hoping that by people buying and wearing these ribbons, it would remind locals that she was in fact still missing. Her birthday, November 3rd, her 16th birthday, came and went with her still missing. And then it was Christmas and presents were left under the tree, never unwrapped. Poor Diana, man. She now lost her teenage daughter and her boyfriend, who was a suspect by police. He literally just up and bailed. I cannot even imagine what was going through her head at that time. She was just constantly looking for Becky, constantly calling and bugging the cops for updates, and just making it her sole purpose in life now to find her daughter, because she really didn't believe that her daughter was dead. And I feel like we oftentimes see such polar opposites when it comes to these cases. You either have people who are just so immediately certain that their child is gone, and then you have the other people who are so certain that they aren't, because they're like, if they were to be gone, I would know it, I would feel it. And Diana fell into that category. She thought that if Becky had died, she would know it. And since she never felt that, she was just sitting there waiting for Becky to just walk back through the front door. Diana would just sit there and she would cry a lot. And she even, oh my God, She even went as far as changing the outgoing message on their answering machine in case Becky was to call and hear it. Okay, this answering machine said, in part, and I quote, "I'm going to tell you that no matter how hard life seems to be, you can always come home to be with me because I love you." That fucking destroys me. So in this mindset she was in, this desperate mindset at this point, because all this time's going by and no answers are coming out, she decides, alongside the police actually, that it would be a good idea to bring in some psychics to try to figure out what might have happened to Becky, which is an unprecedented thing, but that's what they did. They were desperate, right? They just needed somewhere to start looking because they didn't have anywhere to go. There were no leads. So she met with several psychics. They met with several psychics, and they all told her the same thing, that her daughter was dead and would never be coming home. And I guess this was a weird thing for police to do. They didn't often, this police department didn't often work with psychics. It wasn't a common thing for them. But at this point, it had been a year and a half and they still had no answers. So they were just doing whatever they could to try to get something. Now, one particular psychic that they worked with on this case was a psychic that was from Florida who had worked with police on a different case. Now, I don't think it was this police department, but the police in general had worked with this particular psychic on another case before, and I believe had been successful. So they decided they want to work with her, and her name is Noreen. And so Noreen agrees to help, but she's in Florida, so she asks for some items of Becky's to be mailed to her so that she can focus on them and channel them and see what she can find out. So Becky's mom sends her over, I believe, a sock and a charm bracelet. And so Noreen takes these things out and she sits there with them and she starts trying to block everything out of her head. And at the same time, she's on the phone with Becky's mom and a police officer. And she's just going to tell them anything that pops into her head when channeling on Becky's items. I guess Noreen said a lot of things to Diana and to the officer that were personal to just Becky. And it was personal enough that Diana believed that the reading they were getting was accurate. And then she told Diana that she was so sorry, but that her daughter was dead and that she was in a place that had beautiful surroundings. I guess Noreen then drew a map. This was her way of trying to show the location to where Becky was. And she put Becky's location at 12 and then basically had other landmarks at the other numbers on a clock. And she mentioned 2 airports, she mentioned train tracks, and she mentioned other landmarks and distinguishing features that would be in the area. She said that Becky was near water, but not in water. And she said that she could see that Becky had went to meet someone and that something had gone wrong and that she was hurt. And this part is really whew. She said that she could see Becky. Ooh, I got chills immediately because I know it's coming. She said she could see Becky lying there on the ground. And she said when she looked at Becky, she could see a fetus inside of her. And so at that point, she told them that she thought Becky was pregnant. And that's when the chills are going to get real oogie boogie chills, because there was no way at this point that she could have known that Becky was pregnant. This wasn't common knowledge. This wasn't something that was released. This is something that we know now, but the people didn't know then. The psychic went on to say that she kept getting the letter L over and over in her head, and she believed this to be an initial. And she then said that she could actually see the person that had hurt Becky, and she sat down with a sketch artist and had the sketch drawn out. And when police saw this sketch and looked at it through the lens of the letter L, they realized that this looked like someone who had an initial L that was related in some way to Becky. But we will get there. Police took this psychic's information a little more seriously than you would expect one to take a psychic's information, depending on what you believe, if you believe in psychics, if you believe in all of that stuff. But police did take it seriously, and they actually went and did searches based on all the landmarks that Noreen gave them. But again, they still didn't find Becky. Now, 2 years went by. 2 years, and all of the leads had dried up. Every lead had been followed. Even sightings of Becky in other states or young girls in motels who may have been Becky. Tips that Becky had run off to start a new life with some ex-con, that she had gotten strung out on drugs and was living on the street. Just, all the wild shit that comes out in cases like this. People claimed to have seen her in a Walmart, saw her in a window of some random house. Someone said that Becky had been beaten up by some girl in some restaurant, and her friend Jackie just called all of these tips a flurry of madness. Police looked into sex offenders in both Michigan and Indiana. Yes, 2 states, that's 2. Michigan, Indiana, 1, 2. Yes, 2. They looked at sex offenders in 2 states because of how close Niles was to the Indiana border. Even though I did hear somewhere or read somewhere that like it's very rarely actually a registered sex offender when things like this happen. I don't know if that's accurate. Don't quote me on this, but that's something that I heard. They also looked at people who worked in the school that Becky went to. They looked at homeless people. Their search, their like suspect list, their interest point. Sure, the net they were casting was large, is basically what I'm saying. It was large, but it was unsuccessful. They did have one close call during the investigation, though. During the time that Becky was missing, they got a report that some bones had been found. So police went, they recovered the bones and any evidence around the bones that could lead them to Becky. If this did turn out to be Becky, they were taking it very seriously. But when they tested the bones, they found that they were animal bones. And it was later determined that some farmer, his dog had died and he had buried the dog there. But they were like really stoked for a second and then really let down. Now, the case, cold as ice, right? Well, you know, it's never like cold, but it's cooled. It gets cold. Anyway, the case is cold. That was until a day in October of 1995 when police received a call. They received a call from a woman who said she had information on what happened to Becky Stowe. And not some vague ass information like they had received before. She was saying she had the full ass story of what happened to Becky. This woman's name was Angela, and Angela said that she knew what happened to Becky and she knew where Becky could be found. She said that Becky was buried on a farm, a local farm that was often used by local teenagers to have parties. Angela said that Becky could be found near a tree line by a lake and that her grave was concealed under a large woodpile. Angela said she knew all of this because her boyfriend had told her. Her boyfriend had told her that he had murdered Becky Stowe after learning that she was pregnant and refused to get an abortion. This boyfriend's name was Robert Eugene Lehman III. How does a 16-year-old convince 3 seasoned detectives that he doesn't have anything to do with this, and then pass a polygraph, knowing full well that he planned out and carried out the murder of this 15-year-old girl? If I were going to design and build a criminal and create a psychological profile, this is what I would come up with. He had zero conscience. He had no more reaction to killing Becky Stowe than swatting a fly. So police in Niles receive a call from an officer in another jurisdiction. And this officer is like, hey, listen, I have a girl here who says she knows some stuff about Becky Stowe. And as I said, police were kind of like, a lot of people say they know about Becky Stowe and they're always wrong. So their hopes weren't high. Then they heard it was Angela and they're like, wait a minute. I think I know who that bitch was. So they're like, okay, send this woman, let's have a conversation, basically. So Angela and the Niles police get in contact with each other and they start talking. And this is when Angela tells them that Robert had actually admitted to her what he did. I guess that Angela had known that Robert and Becky had like a thing while she was away, and she asked him, she was like, hey, just got a question, you know, like something real casual, like, do you know what happened to her? Like, you know what I mean? You were seeing her and now she's just gone. Do you know what happened? And he was like, actually, here's the thing. I do. I know exactly what happened because I killed her and I buried her on one of my family members' farms. Okay, that's some information to be had. How does one have that conversation and then just move on with their day? I do not know. Angela said the reason this was coming out now is because she had actually broke and told her parents about it, and her parents were not going to let her keep the secret any longer. They were like, well, you're going to tell somebody because you're not a piece of shit. We didn't raise a little asshole. So she gets in contact with the police. And initially the police are kind of thinking that it's possible that Angela's just like a scorned lover, right? Like they dated, maybe it ended badly, and now all of a sudden she's coming out and saying this because Rob had an alibi that they checked out and it was solid. And he passed a polygraph test. So they were kind of like, I don't know. But her details were so suspicious? No. Specific that they were kind of like, She said specifically that if police went to that farm, Becky could be found near a tree line by a lake and that her grave was concealed under a large woodpile. Now, police were like, okay, why did he tell you this? Like, why would he just up and admit this to you? And she said that he said that he thought it would bring them closer together. Sure, I'm sure that's probably true. I don't know. I've never been there personally, but she said that she decided that it was time to say something to somebody and to tell her parents when he just started acting weird, started acting odd, and she started getting afraid of him. But her story on like why she didn't come forward sooner kind of changed a little bit over the time period based on what I read. At some point she also said that, like, from what I read, she also said allegedly that it wasn't really her business, it wasn't her responsibility to tell, and she also made kind of like shitty remarks towards Becky, like that she, Angela, and Rob were one type of person and that Becky was another type of person, and the prosecutor took this as saying that Becky was sort of like trash compared to them, and so because of that, Angela didn't really care that something had happened to her, and that's why she didn't say anything. I don't know where I land there. I don't know how I feel about Angela. I didn't get a full picture of her. It goes kind of like this. If you know about this case more and more personally, let me know what you think about her, because I just don't know. Police looked into this farm and they found that this was actually a farm that did exist, right? Rob's family did have this farm, and this was a farm where Rob and his cousin, I believe, would often throw parties, like before and after Becky went missing. So if this was true, if everything she was saying was true, he had literally had people there partying, quite literally, over her dead body, which is just like, whoa. And police are hearing all this and they're like, can this possibly be true? How is it possible that this 16-year-old was able to dupe us? Because none of them thought he was involved. And if he had been involved, that meant that he was able to fool them, like visually and talking, where they got no suspicion from him, and at 16 years old, pass a polygraph test. And one more thing, actually, about Angela. I forgot to mention this, and it's something that kind of stuck out to me. So, Rob, is dating Angela. Tells her, hey, guess what? I murdered a pregnant girl who I got pregnant while I was dating you because I cheated on you. And she's like, huh, what do you think she would do with that information? Like, obviously she didn't give it to police, but do you think that she would, like, no longer date him? Because, like, why would you continue dating a murderous asshole? No. She continued to date him. She stayed with him. She didn't break up with him. I feel like that's so weird. She stayed with him for a while. Just stayed with him, even though he told her that. And I just feel like that's weird. I guess it's possible that she was scared. Police think it's possible that she was scared and that he would, like, hold what he did to Becky kind of over her head, like, you go somewhere, you know what could happen, you know what I'm capable of, but I don't know. It's just one of those things that when I heard it, I was like, how do you stay dating somebody like that? I would just, like, very slowly ghost them, just, like, return calls less and less and less until I just faded from his life completely, probably. I don't know what I would do because I've never been in that situation, but I don't think I would have just kept dating him. But again, I haven't been there, so I'm not sure. It is worth mentioning that at one of his later hearings, I believe, because she did end up being a witness for the prosecution, she did mention that Rob was abusive to her, so that could definitely explain why she didn't leave if that's true. She said that he would slap her, hit her, put her in, like, chokeholds, and threaten her, right, if she was ever to tell, so that could definitely have something to do with it. I guess it's the one thing that could make it make sense, but the view on Angela just seems to be polarizing overall. Like Jackie, her friend Jackie, said that when Angela came back from school, because after Becky went missing, like, the summer passed and school started again, and Angela came back to school, and when she heard what happened to Becky, she didn't have any concern, or, like, she didn't care at all. She's like, good, I'm glad she's gone. You know what I mean? So, I don't know how I feel, especially with that comment she made after Rob confessed to her that, like, her and Rob were one type of person, and Becky was another type of person, and she would also say, like, well, he was always my boyfriend, never her boyfriend. So, I don't know, I just get a weird vibe, but that's just me. She could be great. And I could just be, the thing about reporting these cases is you're getting these stories from other people's point of view when they're writing them in articles, things like that. So from the way she's being spun from the things I'm reading, I'm not sure how I feel about her. That's what I'll say. Just a little messy overall, but my opinion of her hardly matters because in the end, she ended up a witness for the prosecution and she was never charged with anything. So that's where, you know, her involvement in all this kind of ends. Oh, and another wild thing when it comes to this case and talking about the parties, you remember, because I don't want to forget this when we get too far into the case. Apparently, Angela wasn't the only person that Rob admitted to killing Becky to. Apparently, he would have, like, these parties. He would go to parties, he would have parties, and he'd get all hammered. And then he would just start admitting it to people. Like, anytime she came up at a party and he had had a couple drinks in him, he'd be like, oh yeah, I killed her. And everybody seemingly thought that he was just joking, which is, like, a fucked up joke, A. And if you know his proximity to her, it would make me feel like maybe he wasn't joking. But, you know, these are also kids, and kids are stupid. If you're a kid, I'm sorry. You'll get smarter as you get older. And you might not be one of the stupid ones, but I mean, statistically speaking. Now, police do decide that this tip is at least credible enough to look into, right? Like, we have to at least check the situation out. So they go to this farm. Tree line is there. Lake is there. And then they see it. A large wood pile. And they're like, oh shit, she's got some very specifics. I mean, she could have just been here before, but let's see what we can do. So they start digging with shovels, right? Manually digging. And they're like, man, this is going to take forever. This is not getting us anywhere, because after hours, they still hadn't found anything. So one of the officers there knew somebody who owned a backhoe. So they're like, let's bring in the big guns. They bring in this backhoe and they start digging, but they're doing it very gingerly, just like inch by inch, removing the dirt, the earth, whatever, because they know what they're looking for. So they need to be careful. While they were doing this with the backhoe, there were a couple of officers down on the ground by the hole, kind of watching, seeing up close if they saw anything. And all of a sudden they were hit with a really horrible smell. And then with the next scoop, they uncovered what they had all been sort of dreading they would find, honestly. Basically what happened is the backhoe did its scoop and it snagged a piece of like red fabric. So the officers that were on the ground got down there and they started like moving the dirt manually to see what they could find. And that's when they uncovered a body. And it sucks because they were like, they were dreading it. As I said, they weren't hoping to find the dead body of a 15-year-old girl. You know, you want resolution, but you're hoping that this isn't going to be the resolution. But after 2 years, they kind of knew this is what it was going to be. But that's exactly what was happening. They were finding her body. They were finding her skeleton. And what they had pulled up was partial skeletal remains, a pelvic and a thigh bone, in a pair of girls' shorts. And something that like broke my heart. These little details are the things that get to me, and they're things that I don't want to say I feel like aren't usually included when people cover cases, but I find that every person who covers a case does it in a unique way, right? That's why you watch so many different creators. And I feel like everyone who researches a case finds different points of interest that really hit them, right? And one point that really hit me is another thing that they found in the hole with her body was this pearl necklace that Becky always wore that her mom gave her. And that just made my heart hurt a little bit, because it just shows that it's something so personal to her and it's something she was wearing, and then they find it in the hole with her skeleton and it just made my heart hurt. But anyways, moving on. Police call in a forensic anthropologist because they're like, okay, we need this to be recovered in a way that is, you know, top notch for our investigation. So the forensic anthropologist comes. Bones came to investigate the bones, right? She climbs in the hole with like her little shovel and paintbrush, and she excavates the entire scene, and she finds the rest of her skeleton, including an intact female skull. And she could tell from looking at the bones that this was the body, the remains of a teenage girl, and later dental records confirmed that this was in fact Becky. Police then had the, difficult task of informing Becky's family that they had found her body. An officer went to Diana's house, and as soon as she saw him, like walking, it just gives me the chills. As soon as the officer saw him, As soon as Diana saw the officer, she was like, she's dead, isn't she? And the officer was like, yes, she's been dead since the day she went missing. And I can only imagine how this felt for Diana. I know that when the officer left, she immediately called Cindy and was like, I need you to come over. They found Becky. And Cindy said that she just was in total shock. And if you don't remember who Cindy is because you didn't watch last week's video, or, it's her older sister. Becky had an older sister named Cindy who was 11 years older than her. So that's who I'm talking about here, in case, because I don't think I've mentioned her in this video yet. Jackie says when she found out that her best friend was dead, she just cried, like, a lot. But she said it also made her feel a little bit better because at least they had some answers and they weren't just stuck in this perpetual limbo forever of, wondering, trying to guess, hoping she'd come back, but feeling like she never would, but not being able to give up hope because that's what you're supposed to do. At least now there was closure in that regard. So, Becky's remains were taken to the medical examiner, to be examined, because that's quite literally what they do. It's in the name. And the medical examiner wasn't able to determine the cause of death because of how decomposed she was. I mean, she was literally just a skeleton at this point, and they weren't able to confirm that she actually was pregnant at the time that she was killed. Basically, all they were able to really confirm is that this was, in fact, Becky Stowe. At this point, police want to talk to Rob, right? They've got some questions for this guy, but I guess Rob must have caught wind that they were, like, digging up his family farm, because I read that he actually went to police and like showed up voluntarily of his own free will and was like, listen, I need to tell you guys what really Now, when Rob confessed to what happened after Becky's body was found, he said that at the time that she went missing, he was scared out of his mind, that he was incredibly stressed and under a lot of pressure because of school and sports and all of that jazz. And when he learned that he was having a baby, he was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do. So him and Becky decided they wanted to talk about everything. So she called him, was like, I'm at Jackie's. He drove over. He picked her up at Jackie's and they went to his family's farm so they could just sit and have a nice place to talk by the lake. He says the two were sitting there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes, just kind of joking about the whole situation, making light of everything, when he kind of like jokingly shoved her and was like, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. And he says her response to this was that she punched him. And that in response to the punch, he got super pissed. And he grabbed her and he put her in a chokehold and they started to wrestle around, roll around, when all of a sudden he heard an eerie pop and she went limp. That's his story. That's what he's saying happened. Police hear this and they're like, okay, sure. If that's the case, then why did you and your cousin dig the hole that she was buried in the day before? Because they found out that he dug the hole that he put her body in the day before. And actually he had his cousin do it with him. And what's really messed up here is that his cousin, oh my fucking God, his cousin had an intellectual disability. Okay. And so Rob convinced him to do this under the pretense of it being something else. And that note made me so fucking mad. Like, oh my God, to be manipulated like that into doing something so horrible and just thinking you're hanging out with your cousin, because it turns out they were like really close. What an asshole. Like, not like I'd expect more from him because he literally killed a pregnant girl, but like, come on, man. Don't be a fucking piece of shit. Just stop being pieces of shit. People, stop it. Stop it. I guess what happened is that Rob and his cousin and very close friend Gary, like, were digging the hole. And Rob told him that it was for animal carcasses, and he didn't question him because, you know, he was a close friend. They were really, really close. He had no reason not to trust him. But Rob said things that would have led most people to be like, whoa, what? But he chose somebody who he knew wouldn't, because he was getting in and out of the hole. And apparently he was super calm, super relaxed, super chill. But he was also saying things like, yeah, the bitch will fit in here. And then after the deed was done, he told his cousin, like, don't worry about the hole. I put her in it. And he, like, didn't put it together, which is just like, oh. It was just so clear that he knew what he was going to do by digging that hole. He even left the shovel there so that he could fill it in later. Like, it just shows so much that it was premeditated. It makes me sick. Gary did say that he was mentally slow, his words, not mine, and that when, like, this was his justification for not putting 2 and 2 together about the hole. He said when Rob said that they were going to put animal carcasses in it, it made total sense to him because, or it kind of made sense to him, was his phrasing of that, because Rob and him often hunted, and when they did, they would dispose of the dead animals behind Rob's uncle's, Gary's dad, I believe's, barn. He said that he and Rob were very close, Rob being like a brother to him, and that the two spent most of their days together on that farm, exploring, hunting, fishing, and camping. So I can't even imagine how hard it was for this guy after he learned what he was really doing, what he was really helping Rob do. Now, this is going to be upsetting, but it turns out that when the news broke that it was Rob who was, confessing to killing Becky, her friends and her family were not surprised at all. Apparently, Jackie knew from day one. When Rob called her that day when Becky was missing, she talked to him on the phone. She hung up. She looked at her boyfriend and was like, I know that motherfucker knows where she is. It was said that the last time that Becky and Rob saw each other before the day he killed her, the two had been, I believe, at her house, and they were having a heated discussion about the baby and about the subject of abortion. And the conversation got very, tense, arguing, yelling, and then he leaves. He gets in his car and he starts to take off, and as he does, he screams at her, "You ruined my life." So he had very strong feelings about this. Becky's friends were convinced from the beginning that it was Rob, so they often confronted him and questioned him. They would go up to him at school, they would show up at his house, and they'd be like, okay, what do you know? We know you know something. What did you do? We know you did something. We know you killed her. It got so bad that Rob actually contacted the detectives. He had the balls. He contacted the detectives and told the detectives that Becky's friends were harassing him. And the detectives asked them to stop. Okay? They even went as far as harassing Rob's girlfriend at the time, Angela, when she came back from New York, and they would pester her too. They were like, hey, what did he do? What do you know? And she's like, listen, I don't know anything. And Rob is not a person who's capable of something like this. And now I don't know if she said this after she knew what happened, because that would make it even worse. But like her friends were basically like, we know, but we can't prove it. It's not what you know. It's what you can prove. Training day. Also eye for an eye with Sally Field. Even Becky's mom believed that Rob had something to do with it. And I guess she would often bring this up to detectives and wouldn't stop. She was insistent about it. And I guess the detectives were always like, listen, like we cleared him. He had nothing to do with it. You got to stop. And she wouldn't. So at one point, one of the detectives actually like snapped on Diana, this grieving mother, and like pounded his fist into his desk. I think she said 3 times, like, Robert Lehman has nothing to do with this. And I bet that detective feels real fucking stupid now. That's all I'm going to say about that. So police then arrest Robert Lehman, and this arrest came 3 days after receiving the call from Angela, and he was being charged with open murder, which actually wasn't a term that I had heard of before, which is weird because it seems like I've heard the concept of it, I've heard of, but I had never heard it called open murder. So basically what it is they're just going into court and he can be found guilty of either first or second degree murder. They're not going for either one specifically. I believe this also happened in the Gwen case too, which I'll link down below if I remember, but basically they're going to just take it to court, present all the information, and the jury can then choose to find him guilty of first or second degree murder based on what they believe he is guilty of. And there was the question about whether he be tried as a juvenile or an adult, because he was 16 when he committed the murder, but by the time he was, found to be not found to be guilty, by the time he was arrested, he was an adult. So it was like, is he going to be tried as an adult? Is he going to be tried as a juvenile? And ultimately he was tried as an adult due to the severity of his crime. And once he was arrested, man, people had finally just like a breath of feeling of relief, because they had just been, I imagine when I think of these things, I imagine the people in Becky's life just holding their breath, right? Just holding their breath and waiting and never able to like get that because there is nothing final, nothing's happened. And finally there was an arrest and some rest for the people who had just been waiting. Anyways, the trial started in 1997 and it took place in another small town, not Niles, Ohio, and Becky's friends and family traveled to this other town so that they could be present. One of Becky's cousins said that she went to like all the trials and she even brought pen and paper and took notes of everything that was said because she didn't want to forget anything about this day, which everyone grieves in their own way. But yeah, she said she wrote down everything that every person said so that it wouldn't be like misquoted later. During the hearing, the prosecution presented their theory of what they believed happened. They believed that Rob and Becky got together to discuss the pregnancy, and that instead of taking her to the lake, he took her to that hole. He wanted to show her just how serious he was about not wanting this baby. He took her, he showed it to her and was like, do you see how serious I am about you getting an abortion? You cannot have this kid. I don't want it. You're gonna ruin my life. He did not want a baby with her. He said himself that he was even slumming it by even being with her. So is he really going to want to like link himself to her for the rest of his life? No, the prosecution said that he believed that Robert would rather murder her than deal with the embarrassment of being with her, which is just like, and anyways, for a quick palate cleanser, like a mid-video palate cleanser, because I feel like we kind of need it here, or at least I need it. The prosecutor said something in this case that I was like, I can't unknow it. It's one of those things that I have to know, so now you have to know, because it's just not ridiculous, it's just, you'll know. The prosecutor said that he was like, I don't get it. Robert is, quote, not all that in a bag of chips, end quote. He literally said that, specifically that. And I was like, it's just such a silly thing for a grown man to say. And he was like, I don't know, maybe if I was like a 15-year-old girl, I'd be able to see it, but standing here is like, a grown-ass man, I just don't see it. I don't think he's all that. And just the phrase, all that in a bag of chips, I was like, 1995. Anyways, back to the horror of what Rob did to Becky. The prosecution thinks that at that point they started to fight, they started to struggle, and that he strangled Becky, Rob strangled Becky into the point of unconsciousness, and then placed her in that hole. The prosecutor said of this and of her death, and I quote, she might not have died instantly from being strangled. Becky Stowe was buried alive. That is very extreme though, right? We don't know for sure that that's what happened. One forensic person, somebody testified, stating that she likely died from the strangulation before being put in the hole, but then another one testified saying that it was likely that she was just strangled to unconsciousness and put into the hole alive. The fact is we don't know, but either way, it's horrible. And it's the type of thing that, like, would a 16-year-old boy know that he had killed her? Like, would he have strangled her to death, or would he have strangled her till he thought she was dead and she wasn't? Like, it's really sad to consider. But we don't know because her remains were skeletal. So it's just going to be one of those things that we have to hope that she wasn't buried alive, because that is the worst thing, right? Like, It also came out at trial that Rob was a piece of shit in a lot of other ways. He was said to hurt and kill animals like frogs and gophers and dogs. And it came out that Rob was probably abusive to Angela, Angela, the woman who turned him in, the girlfriend. She said that he would beat her, he would hit her, he would slap her. And at one point he put her in a chokehold. And this was after he told her what he had done to Becky. So as she's sitting there struggling, all she could think about is what could possibly happen to her as well. It also came out at trial that his airtight alibi wasn't so airtight. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be here, right? Because if he had an airtight alibi, he wouldn't have done it. It turns out that he had somebody clock in and out for him at work. Somebody did that for him, which, first off, don't do that for people. Don't. In addition to that, he had dug the hole in advance. So this 16-year-old kid planned this out so much, which is so scary to think about. That's evil at such a young age. He even went as far as deciding to strangle her instead of using a knife so he could avoid blood. Anyways, after killing Becky, he took the shovel that he used to bury her and he threw it in the back of his truck. And then he drove home. He took a shower and he acted like nothing had happened. He went and he visited his mom. She was at work. He then left and went to work himself, on the way, throwing the shovel in a dumpster to get rid of the evidence. And then he called Jackie to ask for Becky. Then that same afternoon, he went back to the farm, met up with his cousin, and said he needed help filling the hole the rest of the way. I guess he had just covered her so that his cousin couldn't see her, but was like, hey, can you help me finish putting the rest of the dirt in this hole? So they do that. And at that time, he even showed his cousin where Becky had bit him on his arm, but his cousin still wasn't able to put two and two together. The prosecution said of this murder, and I quote, Becky Stowe died because she had a crush on a kid, and she fell in love with him. She slept with him, she got pregnant. And this kid, out of all the people she could have picked, was a homicidal sociopath. And when faced with the choice of being embarrassed that he slept with her or killing her, he chose killing her. Now the defense tried to present the defense of diminished capacity for Rob, basically saying that he had PTSD due to some abuse he suffered as a child. Now, I did look into this a little bit, and it's actually kind of horrible. Apparently, like 70 kids reported that they were abused while at a daycare center by a teacher's aide who worked there. And Rob's mom said that Rob never admitted that this abuse happened to her when she was a kid, but that all she would say, like after it came out that this happened and she's, asking her son, did anything happen to her? All he would talk about was the man's large feet, which is a chilling statement, to be honest, and something called the burial game that he would play with him. But this is something that he wouldn't explain what it was because he said he couldn't talk about it. But when you think about the name of it in context to this case, it is like, it makes you go like this, like, And this is horrible, right? We're not going to say that this isn't like absolutely terrible and disgusting. So feel bad for the child, feel bad for Robert as a kid, but we don't feel bad for the murdering dickhead, the guy who murdered a 15-year-old pregnant girl. And regardless of my feelings or anything, the court rejected the diminished capacity defense. And man, something else that came out in this competency hearing that I just have to tell you guys about because I found it to be like a laughable statement. I saw it on newspapers.com is where it is at, and it was in a newspaper. Basically, a psychologist testified at his competency hearing saying that there was no psychological link between Robert digging the hole and later killing Becky and putting her in it. And I was like, sir, are you dumb? Like, you don't think there's a link between him digging a hole the day before and then bringing her there, killing her, putting her in it, and burying her? There's no link there? They're not related one to the other? He said that that Robert was far too scatterbrained to have planned it out that thoroughly. To which I'm like, but sir, he did plan it out so thoroughly. He did it. We know. Like, look. I'm just confused. Like, did the doctor believe the animal carcass story? Because I feel like that's a little bit unbelievable. Like, I just have some questions. I have some questions for that goat. But it's just one of those notes that stuck out to me. Anyways, the two cases were presented, prosecution and defense, and the prosecution ended their, closing arguments, I guess you could say, saying to the jury, and I quote, "Now, knowing all you know, are you gonna let him get away with it?" The prosecutor then told the jury not to take the easy way out and give him a second-degree murder conviction. He was basically like, listen, either give him the first-degree murder, either convict him of first-degree murder, or if you believe him, if you believe the story he's giving, set him free. But don't give him the easy way out because he doesn't deserve it. Ultimately, after 5 hours of deliberation, Robert Lehman, who was 20 by this time, was found guilty of the first-degree premeditated murder of Becky Stowe, and he was given the mandatory sentence of life in prison with no possibility of parole. Diana, Becky's mom, cried tears of relief when hearing the verdict. She said that now she can finally move on with her life because this is what Becky would want, but she said that she will never forgive Rob. And she said specifically of losing her daughter, and I quote, "When I lost Becky, I lost my whole world. It's still gone, and I'll never get it back." When Robert heard his fate, he had little emotional reaction, but that was kind of par for the course because he didn't really show any emotion through the trial either. After the trial, there was finally a sense of closure, justice, and finality for her family and those who loved her. And after the trial, they all went and gathered at Becky's grave. Her friends and her family, they all went there together. And they told her, it's so sad. They told her that she could rest easy now, that it was done, that he was in jail, and he was never getting out. Robert's family released a statement after the trial, basically saying that everyone here had suffered a great loss, right? There's no winners in this situation, and that they're very sympathetic and supportive to the Stowe family for what they're going through, but that they support their son. I think his parents just feel guilty, right? I think his parents feel guilty for not getting him therapy when he was younger, and also probably for something came out that basically when Rob was little, his sister got pregnant when she wasn't married, and his parents reacted poorly to this. And they believe that maybe Rob saw this and that this influenced him in some way, which is definitely possible, right? Like, he could have been young, he could have seen this, and he could have been like, oh, getting pregnant, not married, that's a bad thing. Look at how my parents reacted. And I think that that's part of why they feel guilty about what their son did, which is totally normal. And I can understand that, but with that said, I don't think that that's fair that they have to take on that guilt. There's nothing came out that said they were like horrible parents or anything, and a lot of people didn't want their kids getting pregnant before they were married. I mean, that's just like a thing. Not so much now, I don't think, but it was at some point. There are just a million factors as to why a person goes on to do the things that they do. So could this have contributed? Sure. Could this have helped form his thinking around sexuality and pregnancy and things like that? Of course. But though there are a million things that can help explain why a person might go on and do the things that they do, they're very rarely, in isolation, justifications for the things that they do. Could this have, influenced his brain? Sure. But ultimately, he's still the one who chose to go out and murder a 15-year-old girl, and ruin two families. And I don't think it's their fault that he did that. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of where my brain is on that. At least for now. My opinion's subject to change with new information always, but right now that's kind of where I'm landing. It's just such a sad situation because not only is Becky gone, but her family was changed forever. They were never the same. Cindy said that her mom was just never okay again, which I can't imagine how you would be. She said that Diana was riddled with fear and anxiety and likely guilt and sadness. She had lost her daughter forever. And in the process, she had also lost her partner of 12 years because of this. Diana never saw Steve again. She said of this whole situation, and I quote, "I had a real nice boyfriend at the time. We'd been seeing each other since Becky was a little girl. He was blamed, and it ruined our relationship. The police had me so convinced it was him that killed Becky." It's just sad. It seems like Diana lost so much because of Robert. And you know what? Speaking of Diana and Robert, actually, in 1998, Diana actually sued Robert in a civil suit because apparently Robert started bragging about how he was going to write a book or start selling poetry. Basically, he was going to try to monetize murdering her daughter. So she actually filed a civil suit against him and also against his parents. His parents ended up paying $2,500 to kind of settle their portion of the civil suit, but Robert was still, named in the suit, and Diana actually ended up winning. She ended up winning $16.5 million against Robert, which, wow, that's a lot of money. And basically, he lost. I don't know what to say there. He did actually go on to write this book, though. You know how he was saying, I'm going to write a book. He did. He wrote a book with a couple of other prisoners. It was a joint effort, but he wasn't able to get any money from this book because of the suit. And it was also said that he probably wrote this book to try to win favor in an appeal later, which we will get into. Now, you remember how we've discussed many times in many other cases how the Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences for juveniles was unconstitutional? Well, this came up in Robert's case as well. And it was determined that his case did meet the standards for resentencing after his case was recommended for resentencing by, I believe, his local government or the state. Regardless if he was going to be resentenced or not, he'd still have to serve, I believe it was 3 more years at the time, because in Michigan, you had to at least serve 25 years before you could be up for resentencing. There was some sort of loophole there, but basically, Robert's attorney was like, hey, I'm going to make an argument as to why he should be resentenced to be let out early. Basically, he has learned from his heinous acts. They were described as heinous acts. And he's come out to be a better person since he's been in jail. When Cindy, Becky's sister, heard that Robert was being considered and had this opportunity, she said, and I quote, I just felt so sad, and it was just so painful to hear that news. I just felt like the judicial system had let us down. It's just too painful to bring all this back up. Cindy attended every single one of Robert's hearings, saying that she was devastated that her sister's killer could walk free, that what Robert had done had ruined her family, and that she was determined to make sure he died in prison. She said of the effect on her life, her sister's murder's effect on her life, and I quote, I've missed out on so much of her life. I loved Becky as if she was my own. During this hearing, Robert did testify. He did go on the stand, and he described his crimes, his poor decisions, and how he regretted every single one. He said, and I quote, I feel absolute disgust. I feel ashamed and regret nothing more than taking Becky's life. I'm ashamed that I didn't handle my fears about teenage pregnancy in a healthy manner. During this hearing, he apologized to Becky's family for the first time, saying, quote, to the Stowe family, I apologize. I'm sorry that you've had to come here today and relive these painful memories that I've created in your life. I know that there's nothing I could ever say or do that would ease the pain, the suffering, the heartache, the emotional trauma, and the grief that I put your family through and that you live and experience every day. The defense went on to talk about all the great things that, Rob had done since he'd been in prison. They talked about how he was helpful to others, how he had gone to college and taken classes on social justice. They talked about how he actually went on to work for a program that helped acclimate greyhound dogs that used to be racing dogs and helped them transition into being forever home dogs, which is a great thing. I love that, not for him, but I love that as a thing. That's what Jenna Marbles and Julian Solomita do. They help greyhound dogs. It's amazing. I love it so much. Don't like Robert, but whatever. Anyways, the defense also said that Robert is now one of the people in prison who monitor and help talk other prisoners off the ledge who want to take their own lives. An article said of the changes that Robert had made in prison, quote, the programs, he said, taught him to be a real man, which had the following traits: love, kindness, honesty, communication, and the ability to seek help when needed. The prosecution disagreed, as I'm sure you can imagine. They didn't think that Robert was just this great guy who got even greater in prison. They thought that he was a self-centered and deceptive dick. Not their words, but basically what they were saying. They said that Robert himself had admitted that he was self-centered and that everything he had done was just to serve himself. Killing Becky was a self-serving thing, and that he killed her to make his life easier and then made her family just sit and wonder where she was for 27 months. They also said that Rob was really selfish during his first trial, that he had let his mother sort of fall on her sword for him when she took all the blame for not getting him help, not getting him therapy, for what happened to him in the daycare center. Apparently, she said that she didn't get him therapy because she didn't know, like she had a suspicion that something had happened to him, but that when she was younger, she had been abused in that way, and she had been taught that you just don't say anything. So she had went through life with that kind of mentality of you just don't say anything. But the point was that she was like taking all the responsibility for not getting him help, and that he didn't take any accountability for the actions that he did. And that just showed his self-centeredness by letting his mother take the blame in that way. And it's just sad because clearly his mom feels fucking awful about this and takes on so much of the blame and responsibility. Like she broke down at one point and was like, if I had only done this, if I had only got him help, this wouldn't be happening and Becky wouldn't be gone. And the prosecutor was like, listen, ma'am, you didn't dig that hole. You didn't put her in there. This isn't your fault. The prosecution also pointed out that Rob lied during his trials. He lied when he said that the murder initially, he lied, what? Initially he said it was an accident, that he didn't mean to kill her, and that was a lie, and that all of these lies were just out of self-preservation because he didn't want to be punished. The prosecutor said basically that all Rob was doing now was simply doing what he could to try and get his new hearing, and that he only started making these improvements to be a better person since the Supreme Court ruling, and that before that he had never made any steps towards redemption. He had never even tried to reach out to Becky's family or apologize to her mother Diana, who by this time had actually died. Diana Stowe Ferris died at the age of 67 in 2015 from cancer, and she was then cremated, and her ashes were laid to rest at the Silverbrook Cemetery in Niles with Becky, which just felt very fitting that she would be, placed alongside her daughter. And Diana's death, prior to all of this being brought up again, was actually seen as a good thing by those who knew her, by Becky's friends, and also by her daughter Cindy. They were glad that she didn't have to relive all of this and sit there and see him trying to be released and see him sit there and cry crocodile tears on the stand. The prosecution basically said that Robert had never reached out and never tried to apologize because he knew that it could affect his appeals if he took responsibility for what he did. So again, self-preservation over helping others. The prosecutor said of Robert, and I quote, "Before, during, and after the murder, he was certainly deliberate in his actions. This was not a 13 or 14-year-old kid who was the getaway driver in the spur-of-the-moment crime. This was the type of case where a mandatory life sentence should have been affirmed." In the end, Robert's initial sentence was set aside, and he was scheduled to be resentenced. The judge noted that Robert had suffered injuries playing football and had been in a motorcycle crash, and the judge basically said that keeping the original sentence would be the easiest and safest course, but, quote, "To do so, however, in the court's estimation, would require that the court also ignore its oath of office and ignore an analysis and consideration of the mitigating factors," end quote. The court would have the option of resentencing Robert and others like Robert who were in the situation of life sentences again if they deemed that was appropriate, but basically they said the only way that they would actually do a life sentence for a juvenile at a resentencing is if they demonstrated, quote, "irrevocable corruption." So Rob was resentenced, and at his resentencing hearing there were at least 20 people there for Becky, and all of them wore little buttons on their shirts that had a picture of her, and it said, "In loving memory of Becky Stowe," and then had the date that she was born and the date that she was murdered. About a dozen people also sat behind Robert, who was 42 years old by this time. During his sentencing hearing, both Becky's sister Cindy and Angela, his ex-girlfriend, testified, basically saying that they didn't want him released, right? They were saying that they didn't want him to be resentenced because they didn't want him to be able to get out, because they were worried that if he was released, they could run into him because they were going to be releasing him to their area. And they were both like, dude, this was like a heinous crime. I don't want this guy who did something so horrible to this girl, my sister, and who I, helped put in jail, released back into my area. If he was released, he was planning to go back and live with his family, with his mother. And if he did that, he would only be 18 miles away from Cindy and would be even closer to Angela, who just lived right across the border in Indiana. And Angela was particularly scared because she was like, bro, like, if he was going to kill anybody again, if he was going to reoffend, wouldn't it be against me, the girl who literally helped single-handedly put him in jail and told them his secret? Like, he was getting away with it. It had been 2 years. No one would have known anything if I hadn't said anything. And he knows that. And he's going to be right next to me? Like, ma'am, sir? Like, that's terrifying. Cindy was just absolutely blown away that this guy could be released back into the community where he had victimized so many people. It was just like, how is that a thing? I don't know how that's a thing. It feels like if you're going to do this, there should be restrictions on where you can live. I know that sometimes that is the case, but that wasn't going to be the case here. And on top of that, she expressed her frustration. She's like, why should this man get to go home and be with his family and be around those who he loves, and all those people get to experience him when I don't get the same courtesy? I don't get to see my sister again because he killed her. Robert said at this hearing, and I quote, "There are no amends for the emotional trauma, unrelenting grief, financial hardship that I have caused you. I'm sorry again today that you have to relive these painful memories. I'm sorry that I've taken Becky from you." In the end, the judge decided that Robert would be resentenced to 25 to 60 years in prison, and he would be awarded time served of 24 years and 3 months, because that's how long he had already been in jail. So that meant that he could apply for parole in less than a year from the time that he was resentenced. Okay, and that would have been in January of 2021. Cindy said of Robert's resentencing, and I quote, "We lived in peace before he was resentenced. We lived like it was over, and we went on with our lives knowing he would never be an issue again. Now we're living in turmoil with this." So, with that said, Robert Eugene Lehman III was released from prison in 2021 after serving just 25 years of his sentence. And apparently the prosecution said that they planned to appeal this decision, but here we are. And after he was released, somebody posted on Becky's memorial page, the page like on Facebook for her, quote, "We tried so hard to stop this from happening. Please be aware, be vigilant, stay safe, and keep your loved ones away from this murderer." And for the record, Robert was released and is presumably living in a place called Granger, Indiana, and this is 15 minutes away from where Becky was murdered. Because of Robert's parole, he was ordered to stay away from Cindy and Angela, and on the off chance that they run into him, well, off chance, I guess it is just a chance because he's literally local, he was required to be the one to remove himself from the situation. So if they were just like walking around the street and he was there, he'd have to leave, which is comforting, I guess. But it's not, right? This really frustrated Cindy, as I'm sure you can imagine, because who would want to even have the chance of running into the asshole who murdered your family member? It's just so crazy. And she was especially frustrated because he had the option to be paroled elsewhere, but chose not to. Again, putting his wants above those that he victimized. So Robert was paroled in January of 2021, and his supervision began that date, and his supervision will be ending on January of 2023. So just next month when you're watching this, he will be a completely free man. And isn't that just so fucked? It's so sad when anybody dies, but it's especially sad when a kid dies, right? A child who is taken from this world before they even get to live their life or come into their potential, you know? She had plans. She had so many things she wanted to do with her life. Oh my God, I read this thing when she was 13 years old. She wrote, quote, "I'm determined someday I'll be somebody. Don't know who or how, but I will." And that just broke my heart, dude. This case is really one of those cautionary tales, like about being careful who you can trust. And I read that that's how Becky's mother, Diana, wanted her to be remembered, wanted Becky's story to be used, is in just that way. She wanted Becky's story out there so that other girls could keep their eyes open. She said if the story could change just one other girl's life, then it had served its purpose, and she just wanted people to remember that these types of things can happen to you too. And now I want to end this video with a poem to absolutely wreck your heart. This is a poem that Becky's sister Cindy wrote to her sister Becky. She wrote, and I quote, "Fly, my angel, fly, up in the heavens so high. God gave you to me for a little while, then God gave you wings so you could fly. So fly, my angel. Fly up in the heavens so high. You were once my sister, so why did God give you wings so early to fly? Now I see you only in my dreams. I know you're in God's loving arms, shining like a beam. In his perfect peace, as free as an angel can be. So fly, my angel, fly, up in the heavens so high." And now with that just gut-wrenching ending, that, my friends, is the story of the murder of 15-year-old Becky Stowe. And now that I've given you all the information over these past 2 videos, I want you to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe that the sentence that Robert Lehman was inevitably given for the murder of Becky Stowe, do you believe that that sentence was justice? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I hope I gave you all the information you could want on Becky's case. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Becky Stowe with me today. Before you go, please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover in the future. As this case indicates, if you leave me a suggestion, there's a good chance I'll look into it. Every time you leave me a suggestion, I put your name on a list, or I put the case on a list with your name next to it. So if I look into it, I can give you a shout out because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And I've been especially loving covering your hometown suggestions because, again, they're often cases I've never heard of, and therefore some of you might not have heard of, and it helps me bring attention to cases that may not have gotten the attention they deserve. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. And if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below for your convenience, along with a link to my merch store. This is not my merch, but my merch link is down there, and it's really cool. A lot of the stuff, I think you would like it. And also, there's a link to my membership. If you want to join, you get early access to videos, polls, live streams, things like that. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video.